World War II, the deadliest human conflict ever in mankind. Over 60 million people died in the war, which totaled to 3% of the entire population. It was a terrible thing to happen to the world. World War II was said to be started many different ways. The Japanese invaded the Chinese in 1937, which started most of the conflict in the Pacific. But many people said the war started in 1939. The German-Soviet Pact of August 1939, which say that Poland was to be partitioned between the two powers, enabled Germany to attack Poland without the fear of Soviet intervention. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Polish army was defeated within weeks of the invasion, with a quick, fast attack called Blitzkrieg. This was a tactic where they would have many planes bomb the area of attack, then they would send tanks and destroy more parts of the army, and finally they would attack with their ground troops and seize the area. After this, Germany conquered Denmark and Norway the same way. This sparked the European side of the war. Britain and France told Germany directly not to attack Poland, but Germany did not listen, and they attacked them anyway. Britain and France declared war on Germany as allies on the immediate aftermath of Germany invading Poland. After conquering the three countries, Germany turned around and then advanced west. As Germany turned west, they swept the floor with France and had them retreating in weeks. They had to leave mainland France through Dunkirk. Recently, there was a movie called Dunkirk with this horrific last stand. France quickly surrendered after Germany conquered Paris, and France surrendered in the same train cars where Germany surrendered in World War I. Britain was an island, so they defended their homeland, but was still attacked by Germany. But this was held off and the attack was over. The air invasion was held off, but that didn't stop Germany from bombing many of Britain's cities. This was known as the Blitz. Germany canceled the attack because Britain was superior in the air. Then Germany broke the treaty with the Soviet Union on Sunday, 22nd June 1941. They invaded the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. The first few weeks were very successful for the Germans, pushing the USSR back and making them retreat. As Germany pushed through, they destroyed many towns and people. As the months went on, the Russian winter came, and they weren't prepared for it. But the USSR was, and they took advantage of this, pushing the Germans back. As the war was raging on in Europe and the Pacific, the U.S. stayed out of the war for many reasons. They had a mentality to let Europe take care of the war, but then they decided to give supplies to the Allies. They started to give food, guns, and many other supplies to Britain mostly. They started giving supplies to the Soviet Union because Hitler decided to break his trust with Stalin, and they decided to attack the USSR. The United States was basically neutral with a little help towards the Allies until 1941, December 7th in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. At 8 o'clock on December 7th, hundreds of Japanese planes were seen in the distant sky. The Japanese absolutely destroyed all of Pearl Harbor, destroying many Navy ships and killing 2,300 Americans. 1,100 people died on the USS Arizona alone. Many of the deaths were to Navy men and Army men. The entire American population was shocked and were ready to go to war. America declared war on Japan days later, which led Germany to declare war on the U.S. That's how the U.S. entered the war. Early in 1942, Germany started to have mass killings in their concentration camps. Also during 1942, the first Americans were sent to Britain to fight. On the 4th of June, 1942, the United States fleet met with the Japanese fleet at Midway Island. The Japanese thought they had an advantage over the U.S. because they sunk many of the United States fleet. They were right saying this. They outnumbered the U.S. Navy's fleet 2-1. It was a long-fought battle, lasting a long 3 days, but the United States ended up winning, and not only showing that they could fight back, but they could win. This battle changed the entire view in the Pacific War. Also, the European side of the war was turning for the better, by the Americans bombing a huge railway in northern France. This railroad was essential for the Germans to escort goods across Europe. The Americans surprised the Germans and attacked the railroad during the day with hundreds of bombers. This was a surprise to the Germans because they have never seen an air raid from the Americans, only during the night. The raid was successful with a 50% bombing accuracy. Next year, one of the biggest battles happens. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the biggest turning points in the war. The Germans had a huge success going into the USSR, but Hitler wanted to seize the city of Stalingrad for his pride of taking their leader's city. Joseph Stalin was not going to let Hitler walk all over his army, and he ordered his army not to retreat. They held the line, losing thousands of people, but they soon defeated Hitler by surrounding the Germans' army. In the war, Hitler won no more decisive battles on the Eastern Front. During the same time, the Allies started landing in Italy. Allies bombed the city of Rome and started to take over Italy. Going into 1944, the Allies continued to advance into Italy at Anzio. But on June 6, 1944, the biggest turning battle of the war takes place. Over 150,000 Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy over a 50-mile stretch. Prior to the attack, they sent inflatable boats a place further away from the beaches and tricked the Germans. Although they were fooled, the Germans had many well-defended nests across the beaches. Many Allied lives were lost in the 2-month campaign, but it was a huge victory for them. The Normandy landings have been called the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. After they got inland, the entire northern France was liberated. In early 1945, the Soviet Union took back Warsaw, Poland, the biggest Polish city. During the same month, the USSR takes over Auschwitz, the deadliest concentration camp of the Holocaust. After many great victories for the Allies, the Soviet Union reaches the biggest city in Germany, Berlin. The Allies make it to Berlin days later, and later that month, Adolf Hitler commits suicide. On May 7, 1945, the Germans agreed to unconditional surrender to the Allies. Then on May 8, 1945, VE Day is celebrated across the world, especially in the USA. VE Day stands for Victory in Europe. During this time, the United States of America was still at war with Japan. Japan being on the other side of the world, they did not surrender with Germany because they were not being invaded. During the war, some of the Americans were studying the power and mass destruction of nuclear fission. This project was called the Manhattan Project. During this time, the U.S. Army was planning an attack on the Japanese called Operation Downfall. Some estimates put the operation to take the lives of up to 1 million soldiers. Just before they were going into the plan, the Manhattan Project was complete. The first atomic bomb was tested in the desert of New Mexico and was ready for war. And on August 6, 1945, at 8 o'clock, the United States of America dropped the first atomic bomb, called Little Boy, on Hiroshima. In a blink of an eye, 80,000 humans were vaporized, and the final death toll of the bombing of Hiroshima was 190,000 people. 2 days later, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. The Japanese didn't surrender after the first nuclear bomb, so the United States decided to drop another one. On August 9, 1945, the United States decided to drop another nuclear bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, on Nagasaki, Japan. Even though this bomb was significantly larger, it only killed 80,000 people in total. And then, on August 14th, the Japanese agreed to unconditional surrender, ending World War II. World War II was the deadliest conflict ever known in mankind. It killed more than 60 million people. Over half the deaths were civilians. And the country with the worst deaths was the Soviet Union, with an estimated 12 million deaths compared to the United States' 500,000. Thank you so much for watching the summary of World War II by Colin Harmon and Cannon Guffey, narrated by Colin Harmon.